I discovered the haunting secrets of the worst disasters in history, and it gets terrifying. I never should have opened that door. The air felt heavy, thick with an unspeakable dread. I stood there, heart pounding, a chill crawling up my spine. My normal life? It shattered like glass in that moment. Every day, I followed the same routine. Coffee first, strong and bitter. The sun streamed through the kitchen window, casting warm light across my table. But today? Today was different. The smell of coffee faded, replaced by something rotten. Dark shadows twisted across the room. I could feel the weight of unseen eyes boring into me, watching, judging. Then came the whispers, low and insidious. They curled around my ears like smoke, hissing secrets I couldn't understand. The shadows? They dilated, stretching and pulling, warping reality. I peered closer, but nothing made sense. The clock ticked louder, each second a heartbeat in the growing silence, vibrating against my chest. A creak echoed from the hallway, drawing me in. My breath quickened as I stepped forward, driven by a mix of curiosity and fear. The floorboards groaned beneath my feet. I could taste the dust in the air, acrid and bitter. And there it was, an old door, slightly ajar, breathing darkness. What lay beyond? A part of me screamed to turn back, that I clenched my fists. I had to know. Shoving the door open, I was hit by a wave of cold. The room beyond was a void, swirling with shadows that felt alive. Then a crash. Something heavy toppled a chair. My heart leaped into my throat. I couldn't move. My body felt anchored to the ground, fear gripping me tightly. The whispers grew louder, now forming words I didn't want to hear. Creaking filled the room, accompanied by a low, mournful groan, sound that felt like the groan of the earth itself. Suddenly, a figure loomed in the dark, silhouetted against the chaos. I shook, cold rivulets of fear flooding through me. What was it? The air crackled with tension. I was paralyzed, an ice-cold lump forming in my throat. Then, everything went silent. My mind raced, and just like that, the door slammed shut with a deafening bang, plunging me into the abyss. The faint sound of laughter echoed from the other side, chilling my very soul. Hey, before we continue with this amazing story, I need to give you an important heads up. Many subscribers have reported that YouTube unsubscribed them without warning. Take a quick second to check the red button below to make sure you're still subscribed to the channel. I'd hate for you to miss any of the exclusive content coming soon. And while you're there, smash that like button, it really helps me out with the algorithm. Oh, and tell me in the comments, which city are you watching from? I love getting to know every amazing person who's part of this community. Your participation makes all the difference. Let's connect. The darkness pressed in, swallowing the last remnants of light. I stumbled backward, heart racing, palms slick with sweat. The laughter from beyond the door echoed like a taunt, a cruel reminder that whatever lay on the other side was far worse than I'd imagined. My breath came in sharp gasps, each exhalation filling the void around me with the taste of fear. Clarity slipped through my fingers like sand as I clawed at the door, desperately trying to pry it open, but it was as if it had fused with the frame, an impenetrable barrier that mocked my attempts. The laughter ebbed, replaced by a low, guttural growl that vibrated through the very walls, making the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. Something approached, and my instinct screamed for me to flee, yet, I was rooted to the spot, locked in that suffocating despair. The whispers returned, swirling around me like a tornado of madness. They spoke of despair, of the tragedies buried in the shadows, an unyielding thirst for vengeance, and the souls of those who had perished in silence, their cries unheard through the annals of history. I sensed their anguish, the cold grip of eternal suffering wrapping around my heart. Then, something cold brushed against my skin, icy fingers trailing down my arm. I choked back a scream, whirling around to confront whatever horror had invaded my space. But I found only darkness, an endless abyss that mocked my fear. Desperate, I shouted, "Show yourself." My voice was swallowed whole, leaving only the echo of my own cowardice. The growling intensified, rhythmic as if it were a heartbeat, a pulse drumming with insatiable rage. Suddenly, there was a flicker of light, faint at first, like a dying ember in the vast dark. It flickered again, growing more determined. A figure began to emerge. "Help me!" The voice was ragged, like it had scraped its way through ages of torment. I strained to see, but the figure remained shrouded in shadows, only its eyes, black and hollow, emerged into the weak light. "You need to know what happened here." The figure's mouth twisted around the words, an eerie smile lining its face, mocking my confusion. What?" I gasped, words stumbling from my lips as dread clawed at my insides. "What do you mean?" But instead of responding, the figure reached out, fingers stretching toward me, dissolving into a mist before my eyes. I staggered back, mind spinning. From the depths of the shadows around me, the muffled sounds of distant wails rushed to the surface, pressing in with unseen hands. They echoed the stories of those who had met their end in this house, how they'd suffered and lingered, just beyond the fragile threshold of this reality. Then, a pulse of air, hot and rancid, swept through the room, sending a wave of nausea crashing over me. It engulfed my senses, tainting my thoughts with twisted images of disaster and despair. A child crying in the dark, a woman's silhouette hunched in pain, a man screaming for mercy. I stumbled back again, the space around me closing in, turning into a choking weight. Suddenly, the door behind me rattled, its anger vibrating through the house. The figure vanished, leaving nothing but the sound of my own breathing and the rising dread in my heart. I knew the danger was far from over. Whatever had been confined beyond that door was still there, waiting. Then, without warning, the lights flickered and died, plunging me into an abyss deeper than before. I fumbled for a source of illumination, my fingers brushing against something smooth and cold. The wall. The narrow hallway felt like a coffin, closing in as the whispers shifted, becoming harsh and demanding. Shadows coiled tighter, stretching toward me as if alive, eager to pull me into their world. Just then, a violent crash resonated throughout the house. A window shattered, followed by a knowing silence. I was not alone. There was movement, rustling that seemed distant and yet approaching. It felt as though the house itself was alive, feeding off my fear and echoing with the sorrow of its forgotten ghosts. They had a story to tell, one that I was meant to hear, whether I desired it or not. With a final, throaty whisper, the air shifted once more, directing my gaze to an unseen terror. I felt a presence behind me, static and charged, waiting for something, someone to move. I turned, dread coiling in my stomach, but I was too late. The walls groaned deeply, and with a deafening crack, the ground beneath me began to tremble, swallowing the shadows whole. I stumbled forward, and just when I thought I would find my escape, the floor gave way, darkness yawning wide beneath me, a chasm of despair waiting to claim me. And as I fell, the laughter returned, a chorus of countless voices entwining in a lament of souls caught in the vortex of despair, reminding me that I may never know the secrets I sought after all. I landed with a sickening thud, the ground beneath me soft and damp. The darkness encased me like a shroud, stifling and pervasive, swallowing the remnants of my bravado. I fumbled around, hands searching for any solid ground, any sign of escape from the chaotic abyss that had embraced me. All around, a suffocating silence reigned, broken only by my ragged breaths. Gradually, my surroundings began to solidify in the dimness. I was in what appeared to be an underground chamber, its earthen walls slick and cold, glistening with moisture. The air smelled of decay, a rot so pervasive it seeped into my very being and threatened to consume my mind. I could see the faint outlines of what looked like old stone carvings jutting from the wall, symbols and images etched into the surface, their meanings lost to time. Each shape seemed to twist and shift, dancing just beyond comprehension, as if alive. The growling intensified beneath the surface of the silence, reverberating through the chamber, chilling my spine with its primal tone. It was then that I noticed the flickering shadows around me, writhing at the edges of my vision, childlike figures with hollow eyes, spectral hands reaching outward as though yearning for solace. I blinked, and they vanished, leaving me doubting my sanity. "Help me!" the plea echoed again, more desperate this time. coming from somewhere deeper within the chamber. I sprang to my feet and followed the sound, my heart drumming a frantic rhythm in my chest. As I walked, the whispers swelled and soared, a cacophony of sorrowful tales intertwining with my thoughts, haunting me with cries laden with a depth of anguish I could barely fathom. Among the cacophony, I gleaned fragments of their stories, of betrayals and dark bargains, of love turned to hatred, and vengeance wrought from the graves of the innocent. Each revelation crashed over me like a wave, suffocating and overwhelming. I stumbled into a broader area within the chamber, and there before me lay a grotesque altar, draped in tattered remnants of what once might have been fabric now brown and matted with time. At its foot, a shallow pool of murky water reflected the ceiling's dark contours, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was more than just stagnant water. Leaning closer, I peered down and caught glimpses of faces swirling just below the surface. Grief-stricken expressions stared back at me, reaching out with disembodied hands as if pleading for me to rescue them from this underworld of despair. "Get out, you don't belong here," they seemed to say, their mouths moving in a silent desperation. I reeled back, dizzy with fear and the weight of their collective sorrow. Yet somewhere within that room, the growl morphed into a rhythmic chant, resonating within the very stone, slicing through my tenuous grip on reality. It was a dirge, a summoning. Without knowing why, I felt compelled to search further. My thoughts, though muddled, urged me forward, leading me to a cave-in on the far wall. Desperate for any hint of hope, I climbed over the rubble, scraping my arms against the jagged stones. On the other side was a narrow passage, just big enough for me to squeeze through. My instincts screamed against venturing deeper, but my curiosity propelled me onward, and the whispering of the trapped souls urged me forth. The passage led me into a series of cramped tunnels, suffocated by low ceilings and deep shadows. The growls transformed into a cacophony of voices, all erupting at once, clawing at the corners of my mind. Panic threatened to consume me, and I pressed on, desperate for the promise of light, sure I could taste escape just ahead. Then, without warning, the floor beneath me felt unstable. I flailed for balance as I heard a low, resonant hum vibrating through the walls, beckoning me. I glanced back, shadows coiling behind me with sinister allure, but it was not the darkness alone that unnerved me. It was something lurking within it, something insatiable. The walls trembled as I pushed forward, but the heavy dread of what lay behind quickened my pace. The passage opened into another chamber, and against my better judgment, I stepped inside. My heart dropped as the growl transformed into a guttural roar, and from the shrouded corners emerged twisted figures, their forms shifting and blurring, reminding me painfully of the childlike shapes from earlier. They beckoned me, taunting me with 1,000 lost lives, an unholy invitation into their realm of torment. My breath caught in my throat, and in that moment, the shadows lunged forward through the darkness, coalescing into a tangible form that bore the familiar hollow eyes and mockery of the figure I had encountered earlier. "You shouldn't have come here," it whispered, its voice like ice slicing through my soul. As I turned to flee, I slammed into something solid and warm. I froze, a shock coursing through me, and slowly looked up. The lips curled into a sinister smile were so familiar. Between heartbeats, a realization kicked in, leaving me breathless. They weren't just souls trapped in despair, they were familiar souls, a twisted collection from my own life, faces of family and friends drawn into a tapestry of retribution. With each frantic breath, the laughter returned in a symphony of chaos, echoing all around me, and just as the shadows closed in, I realized I was not merely a witness but a player in this dark tale, desperately entwined with their fate. And as the chamber trembled under the weight of unshed tears and whispered regrets, I screamed one final call for help. The walls began to tremble, ready to enfold me into the fabric of their tragedy, ready to claim yet another story for their sinister chronicle. The ground beneath me shifted violently, and for a moment, the darkness consuming the chamber seemed to pulsate as if it had a heartbeat of its own. I staggered back, my mind racing wildly to comprehend the unfolding nightmare. Deep within my chest, an unnameable fear blossomed, filling the void left by my earlier disbelief, clawing at the edges of my sanity. Suddenly, the frescoes etched into the cold stone walls ignited with an otherworldly glow, illuminating the chamber in a sickly light. The figures depicted in the carvings twisted grotesquely, eyes gleaming with an angered fire as they seemed to watch me with anticipation. Among them, I recognized a symbol that chilled me to the bone, a spiral entwined with thorns, an ancient sigil that I had glimpsed in old tomes, associated with cursed places and insatiable spirits. What had I stumbled into? The laughter crescendoed, filling the chamber as the familiar faces of my loved ones morphed into nightmarish visages of despair, their features exaggerated and twisted, echoing my fears with their hollow, mirthless smiles. "Join us," they chorused, their voices an eerie harmony rising above the chaos. My pulse quickened, and the specters lurched closer, their hands outstretched, fingertips curling like ravenous claws. In a desperate attempt to escape the suffocating grip of their derision, I turned my back on them and sprinted toward the chamber's far wall, limbs heavy with dread and the weight of unshed tears. But just as I reached the stone surface, it began to thrum with life, vibrating beneath my fingers. The heartbeat of the chamber surged in tandem with my racing heart, an invitation steeped in malice. From the pulsating wall emerged shifting shadows, congealing into grotesque forms, their mouths opening in unholy unison, revealing rows of jagged teeth. I reeled back as their exclamations filled the chamber. "Witness! Witness the forgotten!" Their intensity added layers to my terror, and I could hardly discern what they were demanding. "Please, no!" I gasped, feeling the tendrils of darkness wrap painfully around my arms. With one last burst of will, I recoiled, yanking myself free, my mind racing with images of the symbols, the faces, the despair. I remembered the stories of ancient spirits, the ones that fed on fear and regret, the amalgam, they were called in hushed whispers. Ancient souls corrupted and entwined through generations, trapping those who dared venture too close. As I scrambled away, I stumbled over the uneven ground, my hands catching on something slick and warm. I froze, dread awakening anew as I looked down to find my fingers coated in a thick, viscous substantia mixture of blood and ichor, clinging to me with a life of its own. From within that inky pool, I saw it, a vision of a great calamity, an unholy event played out in flashes like a morbid film reel, generations slipping away like grains of sand. Cries erupted in my head, swirling through the cacophony that surrounded me, visions of disasters that had woven the tapestry of this place. A firestorm engulfed a village, drowning cries of small children as their joyful laughter turned into anguished wails. A plague swept through, stealing lives with merciless swiftness, the faces of the suffering melding into a dreadful chorus. As I fought the overwhelming compulsion to scream, I felt them cold fingers trailing along my spine, their chill penetrating the fabric of my very being. The shadows that had once seemed animated by mere dread now showed themselves as vengeful spirits compelled to showcase the worst of humanity's history, desperate for release. Then, as if summoned by my turmoil, a low howl erupted from beyond the wall, shattering the veneer of reality I clutched so tenuously. It echoed around me, raw and ominous, as though it arose from the depths of the abyss itself, a promise that my deepest nightmares would not simply fade into the darkness, but would claw their way forth. With a desperate surge of adrenaline, I spun and collided with the wall, feeling stone shift beneath my weight as I slammed against it. In that moment of impact, the wall cracked open, splintering as a figure stepped forth from the shadows, a gaunt figure dressed in tattered robes, eyes glinting like shards of glass. "Your time is up," it said, voice chillingly melodic and sickly sweet. "You've lingered too long in the remnants. You cannot leave now." It stepped closer, the gaping darkness behind it widening, and I felt the very air around me tremble with the force of 1,000 sorrows clawing to escape. Desperation clawed at my throat as I turned to flee, but the roots of the dark past entangled my feet, dragging me toward that yawning void. And as the ancient spectre lunged forward, its spectral fingers reaching out like harbingers of doom, I heard the chilling laughter of the lost souls crescendo once more, echoing the harrowing truth. Once ensnared by the darkness of history, there is no freedom, only consequence. My scream shattered the silence just as the abyss swallowed me whole, and I realized, with a paralyzing clarity, that nothing was as it seemed. I had become another part of the tale, another legacy tethered to this dreadful foundation. And as my surroundings warped into chaos, I felt the beckoning of icy hands pulling me into their fold, echoing with promises of eternal damnation. I found myself suspended in that endless void, the world as I knew it shattered into 1,000 flickering fragments as I spiraled through darkness. Each twist and turn pulled me deeper into a labyrinth woven from despair, the chilling laughter of the lost resonating through the air like whispers riddled with madness. It felt as if I were trapped within the very fabric of the nightmares I had always feared, a living tapestry of tragedy that enveloped me wholly. Time ceased to exist, every heartbeat stretched across an eternity. I tried to reach for something solid, but my fingers met nothing but chilling wisps of shadow, lingering echoes of spirits long forgotten. The panic that gripped me was an old acquaintance, familiar and suffocating. Yet beneath that anxiety, curiosity began to gnaw at my resolve, the primal urge to know that which had ensnared me unfurling like the petals of a dark flower. Then, with an intense jolt, I was thrust into a scene, the colors bleak and saturated with despair. The air felt unbreathable, thick with decay. I stood amidst the ruins of a once thriving village, the sky painted in sinister hues of gray overhead as a dismal rain fell like tears from the heavens. Ghostly figures scurried to and fro, their faces contorted in horror, a parade of the damned rehearsing their ancient woes that I shuddered as I recognized their plight, piecing together the fragments of stories that whispered through the winds. They were the victims of a pestilence, but not just any disease, it was the amalgam's cursia force that had coiled around their lives, binding them into this twisted reality. I could feel their desperation cut through the air like a knife, each breath I took drew in their sorrow, wrapping around my soul like a shroud. Among the tumult, a child's laughter pierced through the desolation, a sound so pure and innocent that it struck a haunting contrast to the horror surrounding me. I turned to locate its source and beheld a small girl, a wisp of a figure with golden curls that glowed even in this darkened realm. She danced through the rubble, oblivious to the anguish enveloping her, each caper a mockery of the suffering around her. "Come play with me," she called, her voice like tinkling bells, yet laced with an unsettling echo of the world beyond. The vision shifted, and it was as if the ground trembled beneath me, the energy within pulled taut, a taut string ready to snap. Conflicted, I reached out towards her, the heartache swelling within me clawing for release. Yet as my fingers brushed against her ethereal form, a cold chill seeped through me, and her expression morphed into something monstrous, her smile widening, revealing impossibly sharp teeth glistening with malice. "Join us!" she shrieked, and I was plummeting again, torn from that scene and thrust into an infinite cascade of horrors. Each subsequent vision engulfed me like a tsunami, depicting another disaster, each grotesque and vivid. A ship spiraled down into the dark abyss of the ocean, and I could feel the weight of despair pressing upon my chest. The crew's faces contorted in agony, their screams mingling with the crashing waves, echoes of my own impending doom. The visage twisted again, and I found myself within a cavern filled with flickering flames, the heat oppressive. The air crackled with the screeches of souls consumed by fire, a cataclysmic ritual gone astray. I shielded my eyes, but the image etched into my mind. The spirits, still bound to their hell, writhed and twisted, each face a reflection of lost humanity, desperate for release yet entangled in their own curses. As I staggered through this phantasmagoria, my resolve weakened, the spirits closed in around me, their whispers melding into a cacophony that clawed at my sanity. "Admit the truth, embrace your fears," they urged, their spectral hands reaching out, brushing against my skin, leaving trails of ice. The anguish they bore threatened to pull me under, obliviate my sense of self. In that fleeting moment of surrender, the world shifted again, vibrant colors raining down like shards of glass exploding. My surroundings transformed once more into a landscape defined by golden sands, yet littered with remnants of broken dreams, tattered flags, empty bottles, and shattered belongings. It was here I recognized the remnants of a fallen empire, whispers of conquests twisted by atrocities lurking beneath its glory. Yet, standing at the very edge of the ruins, I saw a mirror surface reflecting a multitude of faces, each filled with fear and confusion. But then one face broke through the surface, a visage achingly familiar, the gaunt figure in the tattered robe. "You must choose," it rasped, eyes glittering with malevolence. My heart raced as I stared into those depths, an unsettling pull anchoring my soul. But before I could process my options, the world trembled again, and the mirror rippled violently as if something mighty was about to break free from within. I stumbled back, colliding with the remnants of the past as tremors shook the very foundation of this realm. Just as I prepared to turn and flee, the reflection within the mirror twisted once more, reforming into my own face. I gasped, horror slicing through me, for it smiled back a monstrous version of myself filled with darkness, a hidden shadow I had never acknowledged. And then, from behind, the murmur crested into a shriek, shattering the air and promising annihilation. My vision clouded as cold fingers grabbed my shoulders, pulling me into the mirror's depths, and as I was yanked into that familiar reflection, all I could hear was the echoes of the lost, the laughter of the damned, and the promise of horrors yet unfathomable. That I felt the air drawn from my lungs, panic clawing at my throat, realizing only too late that the secrets of history were not mere tales, they were living, breathing nightmares desperate for a voice. And now, as I unraveled, I understood that I was their vessel, the final chapter of many horrors yet to be released. Caught in the cold embrace of the mirror, the world around me contorted. I was enveloped in shadow, my own distorted reflection grinning wickedly, mocking me with every fraying thread of sanity. The chill seeped into my bones, invigorating the whispers around me, turning their pleas into a discordant symphony of terror. I was no longer simply an observer, I had become a part of this harrowing tapestry. Seek the truth, my reflection hissed, its lips curling back to display teeth that dripped with malice. With every pulse of its dark energy, I felt my consciousness splinter, drawn into desperate visions of the past that sprang to life around me. Suddenly, I was thrust into a fog-drenched battlefield, the air thick with the scent of blood and despair. Ghosts of soldiers loomed like phantoms against the gray backdrop, their faces twisted in agony, locked in a conflict that had long since ended. I could hear the distant war cries, tormented screams intermingled with the clashing of steel, an eternal rehearsal of violence that reverberated through the muck beneath my feet. Then a lone figure broke from the haze, a woman clad in tattered rags, eyes hollow yet burning with an insatiable darkness. "You do not belong here," she rasped, pointing a skeletal finger towards me. "But you will witness what the living deny." Her mouth twisted into a rictus of rage before she vanished into the fog, leaving behind only the echo of her words. As I turned to leave, the ground beneath me rippled violently, shifting like water. From the earth emerged skeletal hands, clawing with urgency, dragging me down into the void. I struggled against their grasp, feeling their deceitful pull, but it was futile. My body was no longer mine. The chilling laughter of the dead swirled around me, building into a crescendo that pulsated through the air. I was sinking into the remnants of their forgotten battles, history's cruel vendetta once again rearing its monstrous head. Another flash of light seized my vision, pulling me into a different horror. I was now standing in a dimly lit room, the walls adorned with grotesque paintings, each a fragment of humanity's darkest secrets. Visions of betrayal, despair, and devastation spiraled around me, ghostly figures entrapped within frames, their eyes wide with horror as they silently screamed. And there, amidst the moving canvases, I found myself facing what once had been a sunlit garden of hope, yet lay devastated, vitality contaminated by the weight of despair. I felt the bittersweet pangs of familiarity. I recognized the connection. This garden was a memory of love, now suffocated by a blight that had seeped into the soil, spreading a darkness beyond reckoning. I reached out toward the fading hues of the flowers' once vibrant colors, desperate to breathe life back into the scene, but my fingers met only an icy barrier, an unyielding wall between what had been and what now existed. Above me, shadows slithered across the ceiling, bending reality itself. Through the garden's decay, I glimpsed movement, darting figures, their presence a flickering reminder of laughter turned to tears. Children danced obliviously in a once blooming meadow, their joy a cloak that masked the horrors simmering just below the surface. Their laughter echoed not the chilling call I had heard earlier, but innocent, glimmering joy that triggered an overwhelming longing within me. I stepped forward, reaching for them, but a shroud of darkness unfurled, enveloping the children in an embrace of chilling night. Abruptly, their laughter twisted, transforming into mournful wails that pierced the air, drowning out the purity of the moment. The figures melted away into shadows, and serenity was replaced with the stench of putrefaction. All at once, I was hurled backward as if unseated by an unseen force, crashing against cold stone. I could feel the darkness pulling tighter, time unraveling at the seams. As I clawed my way back to consciousness, I stumbled onto yet another path, this one lined with the nameless graven stones of a forgotten graveyard. Each headstone bore inscriptions of lost souls, years of torment etched into the granite. "Release us," a chorus of tortured voices wailed from the depths of every grave. "We are the remnants of your history, twisted and bound by the very hands that laid us to rest." With desperation tightening its grip, I pressed forward through the eerie expanse, knowing I was being pursued, the air thickening with the palpable tension of regret. And just as the voices crescendoed into a maddening uproar, I encountered a vast monolith at the graveyard center, carved with symbols that reverberated through my mind, a pact made between the living and the lost, a binding agreement steeped in carnage. As my trembling hands reached toward the chilling surface, realizing what I was meant to uncover, the earth trembled violently. A figure emerged from the shadows, a towering specter cloaked in despair, its form abstract, shifting like smoke. A gaping maw opened in its wretched visage, exposing a void that threatened to engulf me entirely. "You wish to know the truth?" It vibrated through the air, its voice deep and echoing the cries of the damned. "Then prepare to bear witness to your own legacy of suffering." As I was dragged toward the abyss, incapable of resistance, I knew that the worst was yet to come. I had only glimpsed the surface of the horrors sown into our existence, and now, I was destined to unearth the darkest depths. The bindings of time shifted, and I felt myself becoming one with the shadows, losing all sense of self until the call of oblivion beckoned me in a sigh that promised eternal damnation. The instant my fingers brushed the surface of the monolith, a shockwave surged through the ground, pulling me further into a reality where boundaries melted away. The chilling darkness before me transformed, and the graveyard faded, giving way to a chilling tableau of upheaval. I found myself standing at the edge of a ravaged city, its skyline jagged like broken teeth against a roiling sky peppered with furious storms. The buildings groaned, their surfaces twisted and pockmarked as if they had endured relentless assaults from some unseen enemy. Thunder rumbled above, a grating sound that resonated through abandoned streets littered with remnants of lives shattered in an instant. There was an electrifying force that bound me to that place, compelling me to step deeper into the chaos. The air prickled with anguish, the very atmosphere alive with the cries of the lost. A cacophony of sobs emerged from desolate alleyways, the faces of the long dead appearing in flickering flashes, frantic eyes brimming with unshed tears, mouths moving as they gasped in eternal horror. "Help us," they seemed to plead, their voices echoing in the gusts that whipped through the rubble. We were forsaken. Save us from circling the void. An overwhelming compulsion seized me, pulling me forward. I couldn't turn away from the anguish coursing through this forgotten landscape. As I trudged onward, the skies darkened further, straining under the weight of remorse, anger, and an insatiable hunger for resolution. The storm above erupted with ferocity, rain falling like blood, splattering violently against the ground, pooling at my feet like the tears of the abandoned. They were calling meth souls trapped in despair. Each puddle held within it reflections of those who had perished in the calamity of this place. I saw a woman cradling an infant, their smiles frozen in time, now warped into expressions of sorrow. I stumbled back, horror clutching my throat, but the ghostly images relentlessly held my gaze, dragging me closer against my will. What had happened here? The air crackled with the fracture of memories. The voices escalated, morphing into a single shriek that pierced the maelstrom around me, sending tendrils of dread snaking through my very core. "Remember us," they implored in a sorrowful symphony, "and bear witness to the storm of our sorrows." Before I could process their plea, I was thrust into yet another vivid vision. Suddenly, I was no longer an onlooker. My hands were stained with the remnants of the very disaster I sought to understand. I stood in a control room, heavy with shadows and draped in despair, surrounded by flickering monitors displaying frantic patterns of chaos. Scientists, faces glowing with panic, shouted over one another as screens depicted the world spiraling into calamity. The ground quaked, the heavens roared, and the cries of the entombed echoed relentlessly. One figure stood apart from the frenetic energy, staring at a screen with vacant eyes. A name slipped from their lips as the walls shifted, echoing with the terrors wrought by hubris and neglect. "We were warned," he rasped, anguish lining his voice. "But greed blinds the heart. A price must be paid for our indifference." I forced myself to step closer, desperate to discern their fate. Their faces an anguished tapestry of realization, piecing together the threads of what once was and what could have been. With a chilling confidence, I leaned in closer, but the sound of rending metal vibrated through the room, tearing away the ground beneath us. I fell, tumbling into a chasm where civilization crumbled and despair festered. Emerging from the depths, I blinked against the onslaught of new horrors. I was back in the streets, yet these weren't the remains of a city but rather the intimate corners of homes, dining tables set with uneaten meals, toys abandoned mid-play, lives shattered in a single moment of horror. The whispers of the past surged around me, weaving a cloth of haunting memories that clung to my skin like a wicked curse. Each of us bears a weight, a burden of grief. A figure appeared from the mist, cloaked in the garments of both time and tragedy. What you see are not just remnants of destruction but echoes of choices made in ignorance. You are among them. The truth seeks resolution, only then can we hope to find peace. My heart raced as I confronted the specter's words, anguish clawing at my insides. The understanding seeped into me. His horror was not just an examination of the past, but a mirror reflecting my own decisions, my own life. I had stumbled into the very shadows of my existence. Awaken the fear, the figure whispered, and pay the toll. At that moment, a scream erupted from my throat, a desperate, terrified howl echoing through the air, but it was smothered and drowned before it could take flight. I felt the darkness encircle me tighter, and from within the turmoil of regret and pain, I saw the glimmer of an ethereal ribbon extending into the horizon. Find the truth, the figure beckoned ominously, just before everything around me began to unravel. The boundaries of reality snapped and twisted, and what lay behind the ribbon was a vision of chaos, surpassing anything I had seen before, a dance of obliteration unfolding beneath its grasp. And just as darkness threatened to consume me whole, I grasped the spectral ribbon and pulled. To be continued. The ribbon tugged me forward, threading through the air like a live wire. It shimmered with promise, glistening with secrets I was yet to comprehend. I held on tightly, feeling the current pull me into a vortex where time unraveled, and the timeline of the past splintered into fractals spinning wildly. Suddenly, I emerged in an empty echo of the very control room I had glimpsed earlier, only now it was submerged in brackish water. Reports from the outside world played on loop from broken speakers, their bleeding pleas hanging thick in the stagnant air. Fragments of history littered the floor, worn documents, photographs smeared with water, and a cracked glass orb filled with what seemed like ash. I knelt to inspect it further, recoiling as a shriveled hand emerged from the surface, grasping for AIR.no. You mustn't linger. It rasped, a command cloaked in desperation. The fingers crumbled back into the dark liquid, swirling ominously as an undercurrent tugged at my feet. The room shifted around me, walls pulsated as if alive, and all remnants of light flickered like dying stars. Witness the past, but do so at a cost. The suffocated whispers surrounded me once more, twining into a cacophony of agony that made my very soul quiver. You may not return unscathed. The past holds its own disappointments. The water continued to rise, soaking my clothes, wrapping around me like the embrace of the damned. It was an unwilling baptism, absorbing me in the sorrow of lives lost under relentless tides. I felt my breath hitch in my throat as the figures swirled around me, their wails echoing, merging into a diabolic symphony of despair. Each figure drew closer, none could meet my eye, their visages coated with a veneer of death. Join us, murmured a voice that was layered with more than one presence, flesh and time disintegrating together in a tapestry of anguish, a million souls entwined in one. You cannot escape your connection to our fate. You too drew the breath of ignorance that I recoiled again, plunging deeper into the depths, gasping for clarity, only to find myself surfacing within the heart of Calamisha, historical catastrophe I had studied, the flames licking at the edges of my recollections. A nuclear explosion radiated through the air, the incandescent glow illuminating the darkness, revealing shadowy forms caught in that singular moment. Eyes widened in horror, limbs outstretched as lives shattered into ash, their last moments eternalized in a grotesque tableau that pressed painfully against my consciousness. Remember us. They screamed in unison, fury twisting their mouths, voices rising into a blaze of anguish as the ground trembled and cracked beneath us. Remember our names, our stories. You will bear the weight of our truth. In an instant, I was ripped away again, spat out into yet another realm steeped in sorrow. I found myself on the precipice of a ledge overlooking a ruined battlefield strewn with remnants of lives extinguished in bloodshed. The air was thick with the scent of decay, mingling with the acrid smoke that curled toward the ominous, twilight sky. Figures cloaked in ghostly robes floated listlessly in the vaporous landscape, their faces twisted into eternal masks of agony. "You are the witness," they whispered, "but also the mirror reflecting our darkest impulses. Take heed, our fates intertwine." Stepping closer, I peered into the eyes of one Spectera soldier whose mouth moved silently yet whose expression screamed of despair. My chest tightened, and the weight of uncertainty crushed my spirit. Was I merely an observer, or was my fate inexorably tangled with theirs, doomed to tread the same path of devastation? "Unravel the constellations of consequences," the soldier intoned, "for they will unveil the weight of your own decisions. You will pay the toll, and only then can you hope to escape the cycle of horror." A piercing scream shattered the air, and the ground beneath my feet began to quaver violently, fissures opening wide like hungry maws ready to swallow me whole. I stumbled back, desperate to escape the jaws of despair. The shadows closed in, a swirling mass of lost souls now cacophonously demanding my attention, their whispers turning to a discordant roil of chaos. Darkness enveloped me, a sensation creeping like ice along my spine. I could almost taste the terror that lingered. Their hands reached for me, clawing, filled with desperation, dragging me back towards the unfolding shadows of a familiar blind spot in my own heart. And as the storm closed in, dressed in the attire of 100 ghosts I could not recognize, a single clarity settled upon me, a realization that this was only the beginning. The ribbon trembled in the distance, glowing with a hunger I knew I must satiate. Then suddenly, a scream erupted from the void, reverberating with a chilling familiarity, a voice I recognized. "Help me!" It echoed through the darkness, raw, broken, pleading. My breath caught in my throat, dread uncoiled within me as I recognized it. It was my own. To be continued. The void released me, launching me backward into a sea of darkness, and in an instant, I was engulfed in familiar agonia, flash of warmth enveloping me like a suffocating shroud. I was back in the control room, but the water was gone, replaced by a chilling cold that seeped into my bones. Faint glimmers of light danced around the edges of the room as if the memories of those lost souls had shaped them into silent ghostly patterns. A low hum vibrated through the air, growing in intensity until it threatened to overwhelm me. My heart raced, torn between the echoing cries of specters and the grasping dread pooling at the base of my spine. I turned, panic gripping my throat as I scanned for the source of my own haunting voice. The shadows stretched and twisted around me, mocking my confusion, and the once broken speakers crackled to life, a sorrowful melody filling the stagnant air. It pulled at the darkness like the tug of an unseen hand, urging me to listen. "Save us," the words floated in and out, swirling amidst the symphony of despair. The tone twisted, becoming something more insistent. "You alone hold the key." I stumbled toward the source of the sound, my feet unsteady on the floor, which seemed to shift and undulate beneath me. The once familiar walls now loomed like sentinels of sorrow, their surfaces chipped away, revealing a roiling mass of blackness beneath. The air thickened with a palpable desperation, pressing against my skin like 1,000 clamoring hands. "Witness our endings," a voice croaked, so frail yet so encompassing that it seemed to surround me, enveloping me in its cold embrace. I followed it, compelled against my will, into a dark corridor that twisted deeper into a throat of despair and regret. The corridor seemed to stretch endlessly toward a distant echo of vision mingling with memories of the past, the lost souls somehow vivid with every ounce of their former humanity. I could almost discern their faces through the haze of sorrow. Each step forward pulled the ribbon tighter within me, the shimmering thread vibrating like a live wire, pulsating with the urgency of my plight. "History is a living thing," the voice whispered again. "And you, my dear, are bound to it. Each disaster is a mark upon your soul, reflections of your choices." As I latched onto the sound, a figure appeared at the end of the darkened corridor, illuminated by an otherworldly glow. A chilled, a mere wisp of a being with wide, luminous eyes stood there, trembling in fear. Tendrils of shadow twined around her small form, feeding off her innocent light, "Help me!" she cried, her plea shattering the suffocating silence. "They're coming. They won't let me go." Heart sinking, I rushed forward, desperate to save her from the clutches of darkness. But the shadows shifted, morphing into grotesque shapes that wriggled around me, their whispers rising to a deafening roar, each syllable an accusation echoing my failures. "You let them down. You let us all down." I reached for the child, my outstretched hand grazing her shoulder as the world convulsed around Usher form flickering, shrouded in despair. I could feel the weight of the history looming like a black storm cloud, threatening to crush everything beneath it. And suddenly, the corridor warped and stretched, the child gasping as she began to fade. No. I shouted, lunging forward, but the shadows wrapped tighter around her, their bile encroaching on the very edges of her light. Her eyes widened in horror, mouth forming silent pleas as the darkness feasted hungrily on her essence. "I can't." My voice wavered, gripped by a paralyzing chill. The more I fought, the deeper the shadows surged, rising like a tidal wave of despair, drowning the faint light of hope. I fought against the void, the very fabric of reality twisting painfully around me. Then the shadows peeled away, revealing another doorway flickering with an eerie light. "Choose." A chorus of voices surged through the air, haunting, endless, ancient. "Will you abandon her or seal your fate with ours?" The choice bled through me, tainted with bitterness. I could feel their histories pressing down, taunting me with the weight of lost opportunities. There was a certainty lurking in the darkness, a visual disturbance that swirled like molten glass, forming and morphing before my eyes. With a final lurch, the child let out a wailing scream, a sound that shook me to the core, and I felt her essence slipping away. It was then I noticed the reflection in the shimmering light, my own face twisted in agony. "Help me." It was a desperate echo that surged through my being. The choice became unfathomable as the shadows reached for me, twisting my fate alongside the child's. I had but an instant to decide: sacrifice everything or to walk away into the dark, leaving her at the mercy of the looming shadows, and as I hesitated, the last flicker of light extinguished, plunging us into a darkness deeper than any fear I had known. To be continued. I woke with a jolt, gasping for breath, every nerve in my body alight with panic. Where was I? The murky darkness pressed against me like a suffocating blanket, a tightness coiling around my chest. My surroundings felt eerily familiar yet distorted, swirling in a way that made my head spin. It took a moment for realization to dawn on. May was still in the depths of that cursed chamber, the weight of despair clinging to every surface like an unwelcome guest refusing to leave. What had happened to the child? Had I failed her? I stumbled to my feet, heart racing violently as I searched for any sign of the luminous figure that had pleaded for help. But inertia gripped me, fear wedged itself into the back of my throat, a desperate warning urging me to stay and endure the darkness, a darkness that promised nothing good. The shadows around me seemed to pulse and shift, gathering momentum like a storm ready to break. I was drawn inexorably forward, the echoes of desperate whispers tugging at my consciousness. "Come closer, witness, understand." They fluttered like moths to light, each voice layering onto another until I began to hear familiar strains intertwined with my own heartbeat. My skin prickled, and I realized I wasn't just hearing voices anymore. I was hearing the fragmented cries of the lost and the buried echoing memories from my own past. Each step drawn by an invisible thread pulled me deeper into the chamber's recesses. I traced my fingers along the glistening wall and felt warmth radiating through, a strange contradiction to the cold shroud that cloaked my surroundings. The air crackled with energy, the weight of countless tragedies folding over one another like a tormented tapestry. Panic surged within. History was alive in these walls, each secret a blood-curdling heartbeat. The laughter from earlier twisted into something sinister, echoing off the stone like a Cheshire cat's grin, revealing that nothing remained, nothing untouched by the cruel hand of fate. All at once, the ground trembled beneath my feet, and the shadows morphed before my eyes. I froze, instinctively knowing I could respond only with courage or submission. Either way, I'd face the truth, whatever it cost me. I'd already tasted the bitter caress of despair. Would I turn back now, or venture deeper down the rabbit hole? Suddenly, the child's voice pierced through, sharp as glass. "Help me. She was no longer just a memory, she materialized in front of me, a wisp of light against the consuming black, yet only faintly escaping the suffocating chains of darkness that closed around her. I rushed toward her, desperate to grasp her fragile hand against the horror closing in. But as I clawed my way through the shadows, countless figures emerged from obscurity. I stumbled, recognition biting at my heart as I looked into their hollow eyes, the faces of family and friends twisted in pain, grasping for release, but all confined to this cage, a perpetual echo chamber of lost souls. Help us! They cried, desperation accentuating their haunting chorus. The shadows clawed at my mind. You must choose, choose. I echoed, bewildered. Choose what? I can't leave you like this. Join us, they whispered, the shadows curling around me like an embrace, enticing, seductive. You can become part of this, entwined in the stories that matter, freed from your own burdens. I felt the heaviness of my own choices, my own mistakes, and understood what lay before me. The world of the living was crumbling, the weight of history folded into an insatiable hunger, reaching toward me, ready to pull me under. Accept it, a familiar voice echoed, a sense of comfort wrapped in despair. It became clear, deeper than I had imagined. The darkness didn't want me to save them, it hoped to ensnare me in their eternal lament. They were not merely victims, they thrived on the pain of those who witnessed, and I was simply another leaf in their autumnal parademy essence, offering a buffet for their insidious hunger. Panic bubbled within me, and I felt myself teetering on the brink of collapse, the thin thread of reality fraying. No! I cried out, desperate. I refused to surrender, and then, in that moment of defiance, the shadows recoiled, screaming in unison, their voices blending into a mad reverberation of anguish. The room shook violently, and I was pulled toward the center of a cyclone of memories, floods of devastation twisting like veins through a heart long lost to time. Every faceless tragedy took form: the fire, the lost child, the anguish of those unremembered idols swarmed, clawing for recognition, for relief. If I had thought I could simply escape by turning my back, I was sorely mistaken. In the maelstrom, a horrifying clarity emerged. They weren't just casualties, they had all once lived lives tethered to my own, their fates intricately woven through the very fabric of my existence, my mistakes, my ignorance, my indifference. I could feel their truth resonate within me, vibrating like a bell, heavy with sweet agony and terrible knowledge. Remember, the child pleaded one last time, her voice rising above the chaos, echoing just as my own shattered faith began to crystallize. Set me free, I braced myself, summoning all my resolve, and took a step closer to the swirling darkness. No more torment. I choose to see. I choose to remember. The shadows recoiled in rage as light surged through me, a brilliant, blinding force that radiated from my heart and washed over the room. And just as I beheld the echoes of countless souls clawing towards me in desperation, I saw the truth that they were not merely trapped, they had been woven into my very essence. And I was not simply a witness to their despair, I had become part of their narrative, a keeper of their pain. And it would linger long after I left this place. With a final pulse of energy, I broke the chains of silence between us. The voices of the lost surged into an anthem of fury, resolving into one word that echoed in the chasms of my mind, a realization that struck me like a damning tolling bell: stay. And in that dreadful moment, I understood the lasting terror of our choices, the cycle unbroken, the evil forever bound through time. Yes, I had chosen to bear their agony, but what came next would rest upon the choices of those who would follow me long after I had walked away. Perhaps, just perhaps, the greatest horror of all lay in the unshakable truth of remembrance, leaving fear to lay its claim, waiting patiently for the next observer, ever hungry. As I faded into the darkness, one final chilling whisper reverberated, the softest shade of truth wrapping around my soul, a reminder forever echoing, each of us but a chapter. Inked in blood, waiting to be unearthed, spellbound in the void, handed down through eternity. Remember.